I'm live after a 10-minute delay of trying to fix things. Sadly, I don't believe Kevin Logan will join me today. For whatever reason, I think he just assumes bad faith, and I'm unwilling to extend a further olive branch. I don't think that it is my job to make a safe space for him, as he accused me of demanding. Today's topic is the opposition to men's rights, or men, of feminism. My first point is the opposition to men's rights. As many of you will know, if you give this a listen, feminists are not bad people. By and large, feminists genuinely believe that they are for equality. They believe the dictionary definition applies to them and all feminists. Sadly, this doesn't apply in real life. In real life, feminism is a collection of ideologies, activists, theories, all under a loose umbrella of essentially women's advocacy. Much of it does adhere to the dictionary definition, of course. Many feminists are very genuine in their belief that they are pursuing equality, and many of them do. But it is not limited to that. There are feminists that do not care about equality. They demand revenge against men. And this is sad, but it is the sad reality of an ambiguous movement. The same can be said of any other mass movement without any core ideology. The same can be said of Occupy Wall Street. There were many people involved in that were very genuine, but sadly, not everybody was genuine. So on to my first issue, which is the opposition to men's rights. I think this is very easily showcased with Jess Phillips, the Labour MP, laughing when men's issues were brought up in front of a committee to be taken to Parliament. She was so convinced that the man in front of her deserved derision that she did not think of the issues she was arguing against. She was just angry. Perhaps she's genuine and she does care about men, but in that moment, she laughed at them because the man speaking was somebody she didn't like, and because Parliament has more men than women. All of men's issues must wait until there are 50% women in Parliament. Sadly, not all men are in Parliament, only a few. A vanishing minority of men have power. We cannot wait for women to be granted the same privilege as the few privileged men in order to address the issues of all men. It's just unfair. I mean, we have a queen. Should we now bench all women's issues because the queen is female? We should have parity in the monarchy before we can have any equality for women. I'd say no, women's issues are important, regardless of who's in charge, regardless of who gets to speak. They need to be covered, and so do men's issues. The MP, Jess Phillips, even admits this herself. She proposed that she wants to bring forward the issue of male suicide in Parliament herself, so she understood that she overstepped and was unfair on the issues. And I think this is very telling, because a lot of feminists make this mistake. They conflate men's issues with men they don't like. They can conflate men's rights with the MRM, which they've decided is terrorism. And it's very unfair, deeply unfair. Not only to the people being labelled, but also to the issues themselves, because these are serious issues. I think another great example of feminist opposition to men's issues is Obama's shovel-ready stimulus. We can all remember this. The recession hurt a lot of people. The most hit were men, because those were the sectors that were most hurt by the recession, male-dominated sectors. When Obama offered a stimulus to increase employment in these areas where men tend to be more employed, feminists decried it as sexist. These were the men most affected. This was triage. This was treating the people that are the worst wounded. But the feminist lobby did not think of that. They only cared about women. Now, this is not a bad thing. As women's advocacy, it's important to stick up for women, and I admire that, but it is not equality. You cannot be equal if you only represent one side to the detriment of the other. These feminists even had the gall to criticize the name of the stimulus, shovel ready, because shovels are apparently masculine. It's ridiculous. These feminists are the ones in charge, and they make a laughing stock of women's rights. I will also point to a story where a man wanted to write a book about masculinity, and the reaction was not positive. It was not, oh, good, we need to cover this topic because masculinity is an important topic. We should learn more about it because sometimes there's masculinity going wrong with violence and too much competition, because competition is not always good. While we do enjoy it, it's not always good. It's not always positive. And this particular man, Matt Haig, proposed this issue, and he was immediately attacked as sexist. And it wasn't just a minor skirmish, a few fringe voices. It was quite a lot of abuse leveled at the man just for proposing a topic that was men. And this man himself identifies as a feminist, I'm fairly sure. To quote him, "How clear can I put this? I am not denying female oppression." The man believes that females of today are oppressed in the West. That's a ridiculous belief. You can say that women have disadvantages, and I will completely support that, but to suggest that women in the West are oppressed is disgusting. And yet this man is willing to say this in order to cater to this audience that's abusing him. He also goes on to say, "I'm trying to stop it by calling for more fluid masculinity." Essentially, he's writing about masculinity in order to overcome the toxic masculinity that feminists complain about. And yet it's not good enough, because it's a male writing about masculinity, and he didn't appear to be entirely negative. And this is just an indication of any men's issue ever covered always seems to draw out this feeling that it's an attack on women, or that women are going to be denied something. It's not a zero-sum game. You don't need to be worried. We can talk about men's issues and also very much support women's issues. It's not difficult. The last one I want to bring up for men's issues being opposed by feminism, there's a lot more to go through. I could go through all day, but this was the last one I'm going to bring today, is the Red Pill documentary by Cassie J. This one is amazing. This is a young feminist who's a documentary maker, won awards. She's a gorgeous woman. Not only beautiful, but she seems to have a very, very spirit of compassion and this understanding that fairness is important, and to treat her subject with respect, even when she disagrees with it. I think she's a wonderful person, and I hope this film does really well. But this Red Pill documentary is just looking into men's rights. You would think that this would be a positive thing, no matter which side you're on. The MRA would assume that they would get more coverage, the MRM. So MRAs are happy. Feminists should be happy, because if it's an honest look by a feminist about men's rights, all of their theories are going to be confirmed, are they not? So if it's a truthful documentary, surely feminists should be happy about it, because don't they want the truth? Instead, what we've seen is no platforming. The documentary literally has no exposure. Breitbart is the only one that covered it. Breitbart. Right-wing news. And she's suffered so much abuse. It's not even funny. It really isn't. Nobody should be exposed to that sort of abuse. And all for being honest and saying that I had to question my beliefs making this documentary, which is a positive thing. If you can't question your own beliefs, then you are dogmatic and you are not being fair or open-minded or tolerant. Always question your own beliefs. If you can't question your own, you have no right to question others. I will be linking the things that I refer to in some kind of post somewhere. I'm sure that people know about this stuff though. Next, I want to move on to attacks on masculinity. This is fairly common for feminism. I don't think it's always wrong. I'll say that straight away, up front. I think that being critical of masculinity is absolutely valid. But I do believe that constant attacks on masculinity as an entire concept is just unfair. Femininity is fine, masculinity is fine. When they're taken to extremes, when the counter is derided, when masculine men look down on women, that's awful. Sexism is awful. And when women do it to men, that's also awful. I don't see a difference. It's just bad. It's sexism. So when you read about toxic masculinity, they like to say that it's not criticizing men, it's not criticizing masculinity, it's criticizing the toxic brands of masculinity. This is a lie, because they cover things that aren't just toxic, they cover things that are normal. A very good feminist that I like and admire, that's a games writer, once told me that toxic masculinity is displayed by the way that men shame each other over what they're drinking. Now, if you've ever been out drinking with guys, you know that if you order a fruity drink, or a half, or, I don't know, a soft drink, you're gonna get the piss taken out of you. It's reality. And guess what? It's not toxic, it's a joke. This is what I think a lot of outsiders on male communication don't understand. When we're mean to each other, it's not about being mean, it's about a joke. It can go too far. There are instances where it is actually bullying, but itself, it does not constitute bullying, because I've had it my entire life. I am not a big drinker. I remember going out on my birthday when I was 21 years old. I was very sick, I had the flu, and my dad dragged me down to the pub for my 21st, because it was our ritual, because it's my birthday on Christmas Day. And he forced me to drink a pint. So, nope, you've got to have a pint with me, it's your birthday. I love you, son, we're drinking. So I had my pint, and I could barely stand. And I was leaning on the bar. They said, all right, another one. And I said to my dad, I'll just have a half, please. And he laughed at me. All of my dad's mates laughed at me, but I still got my half pint. They were taking the piss. And guess what? It was with affection, because it was funny. A young man, 21 years old, ordering a half pint, it's pretty funny. It's not a bad thing. Another one that feminists get onto is being a real man. You have to be a real man. You need to treat women with respect to be a real man. How is this okay? If we said that to women, you have to do this to be a real woman, everybody knows that's complete bullshit. Everybody knows it's unfair. It's imposing a standard on a person that they might not want, they might not believe. Real women are demure. Real women are gentle, fair. Real women are submissive. Is any of that okay? No, it's bullshit. I grew up with women as fantastic role models, and there was not a shrinking violet among them. My mum was probably the most tame of the women I grew up with, and she's not particularly gentle. So, all of this bullshit about being a real man, it's just unfair. It's unfounded. It's silly. I mean, I get called a beta cuck or whatever by manosphere types all the time. I'm skinny, I'm ginger, I suffer anxiety and depression. I'm everything they assume is bad about the, not men. So when I see it from feminism as well, targeting me, it's like, where do you get off? You're the same. You're the same as those manosphere pricks that they don't give a shit about men, they give a shit about their kind of men. The next one I want to bring up for attacks on masculinity is this whole shaming of sexual success, or lack thereof. Feminists will harp on about sex needing to be consensual and all that jazz, and they're right as a topic. Guess what? Consent's really fucking important. What they're wrong about is this constant pressure on men to prove things. Affirmative consent, it puts all the pressure on men. They might say that it applies to both, but it doesn't. Everybody knows it doesn't. It's the way we work. We're a sexually dimorphic species. It's not bad. It's just how things are. Women are one way, men are another. It's perfectly fine. So when you see feminists get angry with someone like me, who is not a buff, my avatar's a pink hat, so they assume I'm effeminate or I'm a beta, which is, I think, fair enough. I'm not exactly the most assertive fellow. They always home in on, you need to get laid. You can't get laid, that's why you're so angry at women. How is this okay? How is that not a personal attack? That on something that you're saying is not important? Why would my sexual success be relevant to any discussion between me and a human being that I'm not having sex with? It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be to non-feminists, and it shouldn't be to feminists. I sort of dislike, although I have engaged in, from time to time, the making fun of feminists for being ugly or not getting men. It's funny, but I would never do it to a feminist off the cuff just for having an opinion. I will always do it when it's trolling time, which is unfair, and I shouldn't. I know it's bad. I'm going to admit that right now. Of course we do. Trolling is not something that's positive and constructive. It's just sometimes funny. I will move on now to this whole idea of objectification. It's a really important issue for feminists, but when it comes to male objectification, we'll call it, although I don't think it applies in either direction, it's very apparent that how attractive a man is very important to feminists. It changes how you're treated by a lot. If you are not attractive and you condescend to talking to a woman that is maybe beyond what you're capable of engaging, maybe she's a 7 and you're a 4, you are not just an unattractive man saying hello, you're a creep. How is this not objectification? Because what is somebody's physical aspect got to do with them as a person? They might be the loveliest person around, and yet you've called them a creep because of how they look. And it's common. It's very common among feminists. Because it's very common among all people. I don't think this is limited to feminists by any means. I just think that feminists claim to be better, and they aren't. I'll also go into how when male opinions about women are questioned, it's always, oh, women can be curvy, women can be thin, you don't have any right to judge women based on their looks, all of that. Not understanding that if you browse through male media, especially porn, you will see women of all body types. Men just like women. They like women in all shapes and sizes. No matter what you look like, you'll find a man that will be into you, almost certainly. For women, this is demonstrable. They've proven it time and time again. The men that women find attractive tend to be within a very top percentile, and everybody below that is below average. because apparently mathematics doesn't apply. So you'll see women constantly say things like, I won't date a man that's below 6 foot. Now, for a woman, if a man says, I won't date you because you're too fat, you can lose some weight. Men can't grow additional inches once they're past their 20s, their early 20s. You just stop growing. So you literally have no choice. You cannot change who you are at that point. And yet, the latter, the women judging men based on their height, is seen as okay. It's seen as normal. It's seen as something that is not worth comment. And feminists engage in this constantly with this refusal to admit that people are people. People judge based on shallow bullshit. It's not just men. It's not just women. It's both. And we can't escape that because there's perfectly reasonable reasons for the way this works. Men do not get pregnant. Men need to spread their seed to ensure that they have offspring. You cannot trust that a single baby is yours because that is on faith. Whereas women know that they're carrying their own child because there's no other choice apart from with modern technology. What their role is within the species is to select the best mates. So of course they will perceive the best men as being the only desirable men because that's how genetics would work. You want to get the best genetics, whereas the man just wants to pass his seed on wherever he may. It's the difference between us. It's not bad. I'm not going to judge women for wanting to engage with the most genetically perfect specimen of manhood because it's their own offspring. Of course you want the best for your kids, and it's the subconscious expression of those feelings of wanting the best for your own offspring. So I don't think it's bad, but I think that feminists tend to mischaracterize it and tend to ignore women's role in sexual selection. I've gone a bit too long there. We'll go on to the dismissal of male victims. This one's a big one for feminism. It's sad. It shouldn't happen, but it does. And we're going to start with, I think, one of the most important and one of the earliest that I know of, which is Erin Pizzey. Erin Pizzey was run out of the UK. She was run out of the women's movement. This was a woman that started the first domestic abuse shelter, took in women, gave them counselling, tried to work with them to make their lives better. This is somebody that should be championed as a great feminist, but her crime was appreciating that men can also be the victims, and that in a lot of domestic violence situations, the violence is reciprocal. Two violent individuals are violent towards each other. This is common sense. Everybody knows this. It's not some conspiracy theory by the vile MRM. It's just reality. Violent people are violent to each other. That's the worst kind of domestic violence in many circumstances. The monodirectional violence in the domestic setting is very rare. It's very rare. And I would argue that a lot of it is ignored because it's female violence against men, and it's not as aggressive, it's not as damaging, which I think is a fair point. Men are on average larger than women, but to excuse all female violence because they're a bit smaller is ridiculous. And yet that's the reality we're faced with today. It's getting better, but it takes feminists admitting that they went wrong along the way, because their advocacy is what pushes the agenda. They have a monopoly on this issue. So I think it's very important to remember the lesson that we can learn from Erin Pizzey's situation, which is when women have tried to include men that are in danger, men that are victims, they've been harassed by feminists, and the wider feminist community ignores it. This is a bad thing. The next I'll go on to is the abuse of underage boys. You often hear about 15-year-old boys being sex mad, and when they have sex with a teacher, it's boys will be boys. This is, I think, understandable. When I was 15, I was sex mad, and I would have loved to have been taken over a desk by some teachers, because I had some very attractive teachers. But that doesn't make it okay. It's not okay when a male teacher does it to a female student who are just as sex mad. And it's not okay when a female teacher does it to a male student. It's not about the ages, in my opinion. I think the age of consent is kind of arbitrary. It's about the power. The male in that situation has no power. The female teacher has the power. And it can have great psychological effects, damaging psychological effects. This whole idea that men are always up for sex, therefore it's never wrong, is bad. It's unhealthy. It's teaching people the wrong thing. This is how you make abusers, by excusing it, by saying that, oh, they're sex mad, that means that sex is always okay. Consent kind of goes out the window when you talk like that, and that is not good for anybody. I do have some examples which I'll link. I won't go into detail though because I'm already taking up far too much time. The one I want to bring up with the dismissal of male victims is the last individual case, and then I'll go into a broader explanation. Is the one that still gets me angry to this day, and that is when a husband was mutilated by his wife for wanting a divorce. She cut off his penis. It was laughed about on international media. Proud feminists from all over the world were laughing about it. This is like serious abuse. This is deadly abuse. This is attacking somebody with a weapon and removing part of their body. It's sick. And yet, these equality advocates laughed about it and made jokes that perhaps he deserved it. This is wrong, and it was not widely condemned by the feminist movement. There were some tearful semi-apologies, but it was about getting caught and being criticised. It wasn't about what they'd done being wrong. And guess what? Sometimes it's okay to laugh at this kind of thing. Dark humour is absolutely fantastic, but this was daytime TV, and there was no appreciation that this was just a darkly comic thing, a sad event that you can make fun of to alleviate some tension. This was just hilarity. This was a man being damaged is funny because, and that's bad. Now, onto the wider discussion of male victims. This tends to be just swept under the rug. Men are the predominant victims of violence in society, predominant victims of crime, predominant victims of workplace accidents. The men suffer the most, and yet whenever this is brought up, usually in counterpoint to a feminist claiming that women are the biggest victims, it is dismissed entirely because men are the perpetrators. This is their excuse. It doesn't count because the innocent men that were attacked by people that had the same genitals. How is this okay? It also ignores the fact that a lot of women escape justice because there is a fairly substantial discount for being a woman. We all know the difference between the races. A black man is almost certainly more likely to get a harsher sentence than a white man. The disparity between black and white is not as large as that between men and women. Let that sink in. We all know that racism, especially in some parts of America, is a massive problem. It's a very big deal. It is awful. It requires intervention. It is not excusable just to write it off because black people live in more poverty and the sociological reasoning why more black men might be punished because more of them are in a situation where they get pushed towards crime. All of these are valid points to bring up, and I think they lead to valid solutions that can solve the problem. But it doesn't excuse the fact that the example I bring up was crack cocaine. Crack cocaine had I think you needed 10 times less than powder cocaine to get a hard sentence, and it's the same drug. It's just that powder cocaine was taken by yuppies and crack cocaine was taken by black people in ghettos. So it was seen as worse despite being the identical same drug, apart from in different form. Apparently, the adding of baking soda and water to cocaine makes it a worse drug. Baking powder is dangerous, boys and girls. And so we're left with the situation where women have a massive discount in the justice system that we write off as completely fair for no reason. Apparently, just men are evil. But when there is a less significant difference between races, we can all appreciate that it's a massive problem. So I just think more awareness of this. Don't excuse female criminals just because they're female, just because it fits a narrative of men are evil. It's unfair, and it's wrong. Men aren't evil. Nobody's inherently evil as a demographic. And we're going to return to one that we covered very briefly, and that's attacks on male feminists. This is something I see a lot. Now, many years ago, I would definitely have called myself, if not a male feminist, then certainly feminist sympathetic. I absolutely believe in equality. I have stood up for women's advocacy my entire life. I have definitely supported fair pay. My mum was a care worker, and there was a big scuffle where they were in the same pay bracket as some male public servants, but they weren't getting paid the same. Now, I disagree that they deserve to be paid the same, because the male workers were bin men, and that's a hard, smelly, awful job. Whereas a lot of the women that were pursuing this fair pay worked indoors with fairly easy work, menial, obviously, and they deserve more money because I believe in a living wage. So I think minimum wage is disgusting and should be increased by a fairly substantial amount. But I don't think that they should have been in the same bracket as men that did different, harder work. But that wasn't the issue. They were promised the same pay. That makes it a rule of law, and we are a nation of laws, and that means I was 100% in support of them. They deserved that money because that was the money they were assigned to get. Whether they deserved it or not is irrelevant. It's the problem of the people that gave them that pay band, not the workers themselves that were entitled to the money. That doesn't directly apply to my mum, but it's very much related because they had the same issues with backdated pay, basically not being given the pay rises they deserved and were awarded. And they had to fight a fairly long time for it. And that is, again, a female-dominated profession, care. And guess what? Men don't get paid more in it. There's just more women. So when I say that male feminists get attacked, I don't excuse it. I don't think it's a good thing. I don't really like when anti-feminists, and I'm an anti-feminist myself, are accusatory towards male feminists. I know some of them are creeps, and I'll say that knowing full well that I've made the earlier assertion that creep is a bad word, but they are. It's nothing to do with their physical attractiveness, it's to do with their behaviour. And the point is that just because they're a male feminist doesn't mean they deserve any different treatment to a female feminist. They're just a feminist. Their gender should be irrelevant. And yet they're constantly under attack from feminists. Apparently men can do no right. The one that I want to bring up is the fact that Emma Watson, after being critical of the amount of male directors she had, she wanted to make that better because, it's kind of unfair on the directors. And she said, no, some of the best feminists I know are men. Some of my male directors have been great feminists. And she was roundly attacked for it. This is a feminist darling. This is he for she going to the UN, a massive feminist ambassador, probably got more support for feminism than any feminist in the past 20 years. And yet she was under attack for daring to suggest that men could be good feminists. This is not me exaggerating. This is what happened, and it's sad. Joss Whedon is another example. Joss Whedon is a feminist. He tries his best. I like Joss Whedon. I like his work. I think he's a good person. I think he gets misled a lot by the dogma, but I think that happens to everybody. We can all be misled. But whenever he does something that feminists find problematic, he's under attack as a sexist. This man is not a sexist. He's done a lot of good work for women. He's produced shows that feature very strong women. The representations are fantastic. Are they perfect? No, because women aren't perfect. If you put perfect women on there, that would be bad, because that would be like an ideal that you can't even strive for because it's too perfect. So the man does not deserve the bullshit he gets. And yet, it happens. When even a pro-feminist man, proud feminist, constantly reinforcing good things for women, supporting women's advocacy, is not good enough, perhaps you have a problem with men, not with their ability to be feminists. The other one is that often feminists will declare that men can't be feminists, they can only be allies. And there are all sorts of rules on being an ally. If feminism is equality, and it's just a movement for equality that women have the problems, why would men be feminists be a problem? Now, a lot of feminists don't find it problematic at all, and I agree with this. I remember last year there were old school 70s feminists that demanded to leave the room so that it could be a safe space for women. And amazingly, a lot of the female feminists in attendance were outraged by it, as they should be. And that was an absolutely fantastic gesture. If there was more of that, feminism might fix itself. Because everybody could appreciate that it was unfair and it was a generalization, and why would men make women feel unsafe? Just as standard, especially ones that have professed to support feminism. It's just sad. So, as much as I am sometimes contemptuous of male feminists that seem to do it for all the wrong reasons, I think that the concept of a male feminist should be absolutely fine. I don't dismiss somebody supporting feminism just because they're a man. I don't think that they're anti-man, believe it or not, just because they're a male feminist. I know a lot of feminists in my life. One of my best friends, to use the old bigoted excuse, is a feminist. He was quite angry when he discovered I was an anti-feminist. And we still love each other very much. Bro love. I don't think he'd like me saying that. He's quite a manly man, believe it or not. I'm the one that's the softie. It's an amusing irony. But we work past it because he's a feminist, but he's willing to listen, and he's willing to understand that my anti-feminism is not about hating women. It's not about opposing women's rights. It's not even about disagreeing with everything feminists do. It's a counterpoint to the worst excesses of feminism that I don't think are dealt with within the movement. So male feminists are important, in my opinion. I think that they can be a help. And it's unfair for them to be constantly under barrage from anti-feminists like myself and from feminists. The last point I wanted to cover today was man-hating. Now, man-hating is something that has often been associated with feminism, sometimes unfairly. But it's important to cover because it's, whether genuine or perceived, it's a problem for feminists to overcome. Now, I would argue that there is a lot of man-hating within the movement. And I think that even feminists recognise this. When Emma Watson, to bring her up once more, stood up at the UN, she said that feminism is often mistaken for man-hating. I believe she misidentified the problem, but I think that she was perfectly right to discuss it because it's an important subject and one that feminists need to confront in order to overcome it. And that is that a lot of time, feminists do say things that are very hateful towards men. And being unable to recognise that and to fix the fault is not going to do feminism any good, because I believe in strong women's advocacy, and at the moment, feminism is not it. It fails, and that is why I came to oppose it so stridently, because to me it's a betrayal. It's a betrayal of values I hold very dear, values of equality, values of fairness, values of social justice. I believe in social justice. I believe that sometimes people are at such a disadvantage that they must be assisted in order to gain access to the opportunities. And I know that's not always popular. I know that people could say that I'm a cuck or that I'm somehow a secret SJW or something, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Social justice is essential in society, and I think that even conservatives recognise this. That I think that they get things wrong, but I think that they recognise the necessity of helping people in need. I think that they propose charity, and I think that that's the conservative form of social justice. So I don't think there's anything wrong with this idea that you need to combat societal injustice with advocacy. And sometimes that may involve being aggressive or saying outrageous things. But man hating has become such a cottage industry that there is misandry merch. Feminists that say they're for equality and say they don't hate anybody and say that they want fairness and they're for men's rights too will unironically drink from male tears mugs. They will unironically wear shirts that say boys are dumb, throw rocks at them. And yet we're to believe that bossy, the word bossy, is somehow holding women back. Man hating isn't always explicit. It's not always kill all men. It's not always men are not allowed here because women need to be safe, which is essentially saying that men are dangerous. It's also in the accusations of things that aren't harmful, as if they are. Man spreading. A man sitting with his legs slightly wider than standard, just to give his genitals room, is committing a crime against women surrounding him. Not just being impolite. It needs a whole new word, and all men need to be shamed for it. This is a form of hatred. Mansplaining. I understand this is actually a problem. I absolutely do. I've seen it myself. Sometimes women are assumed to not be competent, and some condescending men do try to explain their own expertise to them. And this is awful, but it's not a man problem, it's a douchebag problem, and it happens with women too. If you bring up men's issues, feminists are quite happy to tell all men to shut up and let feminists deal with it. How is that not the same as mansplaining? This is, I know that you might know your issues better than me, but I'm a feminist, so leave me to it, because I'm better. That's stupid. Let men speak about their own issues. If you want to say that men speaking on women's issues is bad, then you have to allow for the opposite to be true too. Personally, I think that gender has nothing to do with it. A diversity of opinion is important. So mansplaining is just unhelpful. It doesn't diagnose the problem of douchebags, and it shames men into being silent because you might not want to be perceived as being condescending. I mean, I've been in a situation with women before where I've had to explain what's going on, and they already know, but I don't know that. So I need to make sure, and the best way to make sure is to go through it, basics. And that's uncomfortable for them, and it's uncomfortable for me, but it's the best way to achieve what you're trying to do. You just need to make sure that everybody's on board, on the same page, understands what's going on. And sometimes that could come off as condescending or arrogant, but them's the breaks. It's life. The amount of times I've been taught something that is very easy is ridiculous. I mean, I'm a very bright person, but I've done menial work all my life. You get treated like you're thick as a spanner. Two short planks and a spanner. The last one I want to bring up for man hating is Shirtstorm. Shirtstorm to me exemplifies this. It's a man that wore a bright shirt and was subjected to international harassment and abuse to the point where he made a tearful apology on international news for something he wore. Not for anything he said, not for any sexist attitudes he held, just because his shirt was loud. A lot of feminists were saying it was nude. There were nude women on it. No, they weren't. They were pin-ups. They were quite demure pin-ups. They weren't revealing at all. We're to believe that women should be allowed to wear whatever they want, which I agree with. That no matter what they wear, it's not an invitation to be touched. I agree with that too. But that somehow a man wearing a shirt that some women don't like means that he should be a victim. Because I did not hear widespread denouncement from feminists. I heard excuses. The BBC featured 2 reporters discussing this and saying that while some people may have gone overboard, it proved that feminism had finally made it. Yes, bullying a man to tears was a positive for feminism. I think that feminists have some problems that they need to address, and I hope today we've covered one of them, which is the feminist opposition to men. Hopefully I haven't rambled too much and I've covered everything that I wanted to. Hopefully Kevin can make a response to this at some point. I don't think I've been unfair. I think that there is a lot more common ground between anti-feminists and good feminists than between feminists and radical feminists. It's just that there's a refusal to engage with good faith. And I suppose on that bombshell, I will bid you all good afternoon, and hopefully this hasn't been awful and boring, and you appreciate it. If people do enjoy it, even if it's just 1 or 2, I might cover the rest of my topics on feminism. And good day. Issues of all men. It's just unfair. I mean, we have a queen. Should we now bench all women's issues because the queen is female? We should have parity in the monarchy before we can have any equality for women. I'd say no. Women's issues are important, regardless of who's in charge, regardless of who gets to speak. They need to be covered, and so do men's issues. The MP, Jess Phillips, even admits this herself. She proposed that she wants to bring forward the issue of male suicide in Parliament herself. So she understood that she overstepped and was unfair on the issues. And I think this is very telling, because a lot of feminists make this mistake. They conflate men's issues with men they don't like. They can conflate men's rights with the MRM, which they've decided is terrorism. And it's very unfair, deeply unfair. Not only to the people being labelled, but also to the issues themselves, because these are serious issues. I think another great example of feminist opposition to men's issues is Obama's shovel-ready stimulus. We can all remember this. The recession hurt a lot of people. The most hit were men, because those were the sectors that were most hurt by the recession, male-dominated sectors. When Obama offered a stimulus to increase employment in these areas where men tend to be more employed, feminists proposed this issue, and he was immediately attacked as sexist. And it wasn't just a minor skirmish, a few fringe voices. It was quite a lot of abuse leveled at the man just for proposing a topic that was men. And this man himself identifies as a feminist, I'm fairly sure. To quote him, "How clear can I put this? I am not denying female oppression." The man believes that females of today are oppressed in the West. That's a ridiculous belief. You can say that women have disadvantages, and I will completely support that, but to suggest that women in the West are oppressed is disgusting. And yet this man is willing to say this. in order to cater to this audience that's abusing him. He also goes on to say, I'm trying to stop it by calling for more fluid masculinity. Essentially, he's writing about masculinity in order to overcome the toxic masculinity that feminists complain about. And yet it's not good enough because it's a male writing about masculinity and he didn't appear to be entirely negative. And this is just an indication of any men's issue ever covered always seems to draw out this feeling that it's an attack, decried it as sexist. These were the men most affected. This was triage. This was treating the people that are the worst wounded. But the feminist lobby did not think of that. They only cared about women. Now, this is not a bad thing. As women's advocacy, it's important to stick up for women, and I admire that, but it is not equality. You cannot be equal if you only represent one side to the detriment of the other. These feminists even had the gall to criticize the name of the stimulus, shovel ready, because shovels are apparently masculine. It's ridiculous. These feminists are the ones in charge, and they make a laughingstock of women's rights. I will also point to a story where a man wanted to write a book about masculinity, and the reaction was not positive. It was not, oh, good, we need to cover this topic because masculinity is an important topic. We should learn more about it because sometimes there's masculinity going wrong with violence and too much competition. Because competition is not always good. While we do enjoy it, it's not always good. It's not always positive. And this particular man, Matt Haig, and revenge against men. And this is sad, but it is the sad reality of an ambiguous movement. The same can be said of any other mass movement without any core ideology. The same can be said of Occupy Wall Street. There were many people involved in that were very genuine, but sadly, not everybody was genuine. So on to my first issue, which is the opposition to men's rights. I think this is very easily showcased with Jess Phillips, the Labour MP, laughing when men's issues were brought up in front of a committee to be taken to Parliament. She was so convinced that the man in front of her deserved derision that she did not think of the issues she was arguing against. She was just angry. Perhaps she's genuine and she does care about men, but in that moment, she laughed at them because the man speaking was somebody she didn't like, and because Parliament has more men than women. All of men's issues must wait until there are 50% women in Parliament. Sadly, not all men are in Parliament, only a few. A vanishing minority of men have power. We cannot wait for women to be granted the same privilege as the few privileged men in order to address the... I'm live. After a 10-minute delay of trying to fix things. Sadly, I don't believe Kevin Logan will join me today. For whatever reason, I think he just assumes bad faith, and I'm unwilling to extend a further olive branch. I don't think that it is my job to make a safe space for him, as he accused me of demanding. Today's topic is the opposition to men's rights, or men, of feminism. My first point is the opposition to men's rights. As many of you will know, if you give this a listen, feminists are not bad people. By and large, feminists genuinely believe that they are for equality. They believe the dictionary definition applies to them and all feminists. Sadly, this doesn't apply in real life. In real life, feminism is a collection of ideologies, activists, theories, all under a loose umbrella of essentially women's advocacy. Much of it does adhere to the dictionary definition, of course. Many feminists are very genuine in their belief that they are pursuing equality, and many of them do. But it is not limited to that. There are feminists that do not care about equality. They demand